The Heavenly Demon. Can't Live a Normal Life. By Sanchin. Chapter 191. New Map. Part 1. At the time of the battle, Cairo's royal palace fell into a deep silence. The fate of Cairo depended on my choice. It was Daniel Cairo. Even after giving Roman Dmitri the command to attack, he kept asking himself whether his decision was the right one. Considering the value of the kingdom, it felt like the right thing to do. However, depending on its success or failure, the price Cairo would have to pay in the future would be either heaven or hell. If successful, a single victory will take Cairo down a completely different path than before. The people will have the pride of not bowing to Kronos, and at the same time, the rebels will be organized. Aside from the conflict with Kronos, it is surely our chance to escape from the reality of being a small nation. The problem was that if it failed, it wouldn't just end with the loss of their troops. We mobilized all the troops to the Western Front for this war. The moment they are defeated outside the walls, the Kronos Empire will not miss the opportunity to destroy the West. If the strategically important areas are surrendered to the enemy, Kronos may change its course and directly target Cairo, no matter how at odds they will be with the kingdom's alliance. The battles that have already happened before are enough justifications for war, and even if they intervened in the rebellion, there is no way we can resist them with their power. It was the worst possibility. With the kingdom's power weakened by the civil war, defeat was obvious. It was really so difficult. If he knew the answer, or if at least the cost of responsibility would be his own life, he wouldn't be this worried if it would only end with that. Due to my choice, Cairo has entered an irreversible path. Even if it was the right choice for the sake of the kingdom, history will hold me accountable for the reason for its defeat, and many people will die. We made the perfect reason for the empire to try to take over us and attack us again. Everyone's evaluation was right. He was someone who didn't fit in this turbulent world. His anxious appearance, trembling alone in an empty palace, was not the type of king the people would want. He didn't want to make excuses by saying he was young. Wasn't Roman Dmitri fighting at the forefront even though he was just in his mid-20s? He was just lacking. Cairo had a king worthy of a small nation, and even if it was the right decision, he wasn't convinced that it was the right answer. He was anxious and nervous. Having the position of king, he had to pay a huge price for each word he uttered. That's why he tried to believe in people who could compensate for the things he lacked. It was at that moment. Tap. 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 From afar, the sound of running footsteps could be heard. Someone was running through the hallway and into the place where Daniel Cairo was. Gulp. Clack. The door opened. The moment he looked at Simon's face as he entered, God. With a bright expression as if he had the whole world, Daniel Cairo tightly clenched his fists. It was a huge victory. From the other side of the screen, Count Vandenberg said with a face that couldn't hold back his joy, "Your Majesty the King. Cairo is victorious." There was a battle in the west, and as a result, Count Fabio and the Kronos Empire were killed and the rest of their troops have been captured. In the Cairo kingdom, the hastily assembled important people cheered. They were all equally anxious, and the news from the west was like an oasis in a desert. And Daniel Cairo asked, "And the damage?" They'd passed the dangerous hurdle. However, the problem was not completely solved yet. The process of organizing their internal system remained, and troops were needed to prepare for the Kronos Empire's response. In addition, the safety of Roman Dmitri was especially important. The Allies' damage is not much. It is all thanks to Roman Dmitri's performance. The surprise attack on the enemies threw them into confusion, and because Roman Dmitri was able to handle Count Fabio, we were able to make them surrender. And in the process, we even dealt with the leader of the Knights of Kronos, Gustavo. It was truly an amazing achievement. When Daniel Cairo gave the order to attack, he had his own doubts about the situation. That was how scared he was about Cairo being defeated. Victory was not a result that Cairo was familiar with, and he thought it was fortunate to win against the strong forces of the empire. However, they were able to become victorious with only minor damage. Daniel Cairo couldn't hide his joy. He wanted to cheer like everyone else, but he couldn't let go of his manners. The war isn't over yet. Diplomacy outside the battlefield is also a war. If I don't finish the talks with the Kronos Empire well, even if we had won the battle, it can lead to bad results. I don't know how the Kronos Empire will respond to this problem. First of all, the safety of the prisoners will be guaranteed as much as possible, and from now on, we will prepare for negotiations with Kronos. The primary goal is clear. Rather than driving the situation to the extreme and resulting in unnecessary turmoil, we must end this matter as peacefully as possible. The civil war hasn't been cleared yet. Although the nobles faction led by Marquis Benedict has fallen, we need to bear in mind that their influence is still around, and the nobles of the empires also remain. We will obey your orders. The screen was dyed in darkness. Daniel Cairo took a deep breath. He didn't want to allow any carelessness, but a feeling of relief spread across his face. In the western plains, a warm fire rose in a desolate place. Weak. In the war, as Count Vandenberg said, there was only minor damage. But that was the norm for warfare, and that didn't mean that only a few people died. Hundreds of people gave up their lives for the operation. Occasionally, ruthless commanders would refuse to carry out funerals in such situations, but Roman Dmitri held his post and waited until the bodies burned. He was familiar with death. He had witnessed so many deaths in his previous life, but he tried not to become accustomed to accepting death so easily. The people risked their lives for him. Even though it was their choice, they knew very well that the moment they accepted their orders, sacrifices would happen, and he knew that if he took them for granted, their trust in him would falter. So Roman was also willing to sacrifice himself for them because he was the one who made them make sacrifices. Looking at the burning flames, he showed courtesy and bowed. "Clean up this place." Yes. The funeral was over. Roman Dmitri, who left Chris to clean up, immediately returned to the fort to assess the condition of those who were injured. The spacious place was full of wounded. People were groaning in pain, some were looking for a physician to heal them, and countless physicians were looking after the conditions of the other patients. Before leaving for battle, Roman contacted Count Fabius and ordered the physicians to be sent to the west. Dmitri promised to take care of the expenses, and Count Fabius sent a large number of them. And they all devoted themselves to treating the wounded. They didn't just do a simple treatment. They also used expensive potions for those who needed them. And the other soldiers saw it. Knowing that the scene in front of them was because of Roman Dmitri, they were truly amazed. Amazing. Using potions to treat normal soldiers. Even though Dmitri has a lot of money, this is all thanks to Mr. Roman. Because of the war, the way everyone looked at Roman Dmitri changed. His overwhelming force aroused shock, and they all felt sincerely grateful that he took care of the soldiers. Actually, even at first, they didn't understand the blind loyalty his men had toward Dmitri. They thought they were foolish to jump into the fire for Roman Dmitri, but when they witnessed the treatment he gave the soldiers, they came to understand that there was a reason. Roman Dmitri didn't neglect his people. They had never been treated like this before, so they felt a bit satisfied with this. In addition, they were told that if they died or became disabled in the war, reasonable compensation would be given to their families. Following Roman Dmitri wasn't easy. As much as he had a reputation on the continent, they would always be destined to visit a dangerous place, but even so, he was an existence worth pledging loyalty to. By the time the treatments were over, someone spoke to Roman. "Can you give me a moment?" It was one of the Western Front's leaders, Baron Noel. He was the brain on the Western Front. Rather than fighting directly on the battlefield, he would make plans or analyze the situation and lead them to an optimal solution. And it was not different this time. He suggested a stable option, although a bit naive. While living on the Western Front, he had been through numerous battles, and the pain he had suffered during all those times made him not want to choose Roman Dmitri's method. Baron Noel had doubts about the operation until the very end. Considering the difference in power between Kronos and Cairo, a battle outside the castle could not guarantee victory. But it was a huge victory. Seeing the fort gates open and returning home in gold, Baron Noel finally faced reality. I must have regressed. Flora Lawrence. She insisted on trusting Roman Dmitri until the very end. Aside from the fact that she had already established a relationship in the northeast with him, she knew how to grasp the flow and accept it. The decision to open the gates, trust Roman Dmitri, and protect the entire force from the rear as much as possible, such an open mind eventually produced the most positive results. His eyes were open now. It wasn't the time for him to dwell on getting a position in the capital, but it was necessary for him to develop as someone suitable for the Western Front. And to make sure of the commitment, Baron Noel approached Roman Dmitri. They went to a place where there were not many people, and he spoke sincere words. I apologize for having a negative view of Roman Dmitri's judgment. I couldn't believe it. Born in a nation called Cairo, I wasn't able to make the decisions that you did, and I felt like a member of a small nation. I thought that I had some experience on the Western Front, but it seems like I was narrow-minded. So I wanted to thank you and also apologize. Thanks to you, the Western Front and the Cairo Kingdom will be safe. Baron Noel was a good person. The world he experienced only forced him to make negative choices, but he was fit for the Western Front. Cairo, a nation known as weak, was supported by figures such as Baron Noel. For whatever reason, they were all at the forefront, shedding blood, and because of their existence, Cairo remained alive despite foreign invasions. Roman said, "No. Blind trust on the battlefield is a deadly poison. Instead of blindly following my choices, opposing opinions are also necessary. Only then can we reach a more ideal conclusion. Baron Noel, you did your part well, and we managed to win the war in the end. Thank you for saying that. Anyway, what do you plan on doing next? With Kronos' prisoners secured, we have the upper hand at the negotiations." He changed the topic since there was more work to do. The war would only end once the negotiations with Kronos are concluded successfully, and all the leaders were hopeful about it. But Roman thought differently. The situation isn't as hopeful as you think. What do you mean by that? Given the past events, Roman Dmitri affirmed Kronos' choice. Even though we have secured numerous prisoners, the Empire will not negotiate. Chapter 192. New Map. Part 2. Every decision needs a reason. Before arriving at the conclusion that he had to pursue and defeat the Kronos Empire, Roman had to confirm it first. Kronos is a nation that doesn't stop any time. What kind of choice will they make if they, who had always invaded other borders first, get attacked? If this isn't clearly confirmed, I might not be able to bear the cost of my decision. Based on the history of the continent, there were 3 examples that could confirm it. The first was the conflict with the Kingdom's Alliance. The Kingdom's Alliance referred to the 4 southern nations around Kronos, and they were not safe from the threat of Kronos, just like Cairo. So they formed a coalition to protect each other. At the times that they were attacked by Kronos, Kronos would demand a formal apology for the reason that the knights of the Kingdom's Alliance, who were filled with resentment, brutally slaughtered their soldiers. The conditions were always absurd. They expressed their opinion that they would go to an all-out war if the knights in question didn't kneel down and apologize. The other 2 cases were the same. The Kronos Empire obviously made a mistake first, but in the process of covering up right and wrong, the victims were made to pay. Similar incidents happened 3 times in the past. It can be interpreted that the decisions of the Kronos Empire were not accidents, and they had a way to turn things in their favor. The Cairo Kingdom suffered in the same manner. In return, despite their demands for an apology and their repeated aggression every year, nothing was done to punish the enemies. Fighting between nations requires a cause, but having power is more important. The Kronos Empire doesn't need a sensible reason, and if we take proper revenge, it will cause more problems for us. It wasn't a common thought. Roman Dmitri knew how Kronos would act. It was the logic of the strong. It wasn't like they didn't know that they were in the wrong, but what mattered to them was that the weak showed hostility towards them. Roman also knew that because he had lived the life of a strong man, ruling through fear was possible if the weak crossed a clear line. Even if the people criticized them, the strong could rule over them. It was a very slow process. The moment the strong ones controlled the minds of the weak, they could no longer make normal decisions, and no matter what the strong ones did, the weaker ones would just silently endure them. There was no turning back. Roman Dmitri knew that his decision came with a cost, but he felt compelled to attack. It is something I have to deal with someday. At the crossroads of choice, in order for the Cairo kingdom to move in the right direction, taking risks is necessary even when the result is obvious. Looking at Baron Noel, Roman said, "The Kronos Empire has never made a decision resulting in the detriment of their nation, regardless of whose fault it is. It is the same this time. Even if they joined the rebellion and crossed the border first, what matters to them is the fact that a small kingdom like Cairo opened its gates and slaughtered their soldiers. Then what are we supposed to do?" Baron Noel was scared. He knew the war had just ended. However, due to an unexpected possibility, he could no longer enjoy the joy of victory. It is the same as before. From the moment we first chose to attack them, the one who takes a step back from this fight has no choice but to bear the full damage. Then our choice is simple. They had to stand up to the Kronos Empire one day if they didn't want to be ruled by them, even if it meant their demise. From now on, we'll have to fight another war at the negotiating table. It was as Roman had expected. Around the time the battlefield was almost settled, the Cairo royal family received a call from the Kronos Empire. "As His Majesty's representative, I will reveal the position of the Kronos Empire." The voice was from someone in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It was Baron Charlton. He had a stiff face as he stared at Daniel Cairo across the screen. The Kronos Empire participated in this war at the request of Marquis Benedict. The justification for participating in the war was given by Cairo, and we only agreed with their argument. We do not claim that our actions are right. However, when Marquis Benedict, the subject of the cause, was defeated, the troops of Kronos retreated and showed that we no longer had any plans of continuing the war. But what did Cairo do? It wasn't enough that you opened your gates and chased after us, but you attacked us and brutally killed Count Fabio and Gustavo, the talents of the empire. We were fighting a war. Is it wrong for us to punish our enemy? The opponent was a noble. However, given the fact that he was representing the emperor, Daniel Cairo couldn't treat his opponent disrespectfully. In this negotiation, the leaders of the kingdom put their heads together for a favorable response. They intended on resolving the issue peacefully as much as possible, but the Kronos Empire's claims shocked Cairo right from the start. Yes. It is wrong. Which is why we hope to be given the right compensation for it. That isn't possible. A war with Kronos was never our intention. We were attacked first, and we just opted to attack back. But you want us to pay you a fair price? If the Kronos Empire decides to act like this, we have no choice but to formally take this case to the international community. And Cairo was even thinking of releasing the prisoners first as a gesture of peace, but if the Kronos Empire continues to be hostile, we are left with no other options. He came out strong. Representing the Cairo kingdom's voice, he didn't want to back down this time. Do whatever you want. Raising a problem with the international community will not provide a reason for Cairo to go to war. And Kronos will not accept any bargain for the lives of the captives. Now, we will give you two options. There are no other negotiations. It was a one-sided conversation. The other side went silent, and the empire's thoughts were displayed. We request Roman Dimitri's punishment for brutally murdering Count Fabio. In return, we want one of his arms. If Roman Dimitri comes to the empire, offers his arm, and kneels down to apologize, and if you release all of Kronos' prisoners, the Kronos Empire will not make this incident an issue anymore. That is your first option. If you reject that, the second option would be an all-out war against Kronos. Negotiations will not be allowed for the first 10 days of the war. Make your decision now. If not, Kronos will declare war against the Cairo kingdom. That was the end. Baron Charlton cut off the communication without even listening to his answer. Tuck. At the Cairo royal palace, everyone was shocked after the meeting. They were at a loss for words in response to what they had heard, and they were afraid to figure out how to accept this situation. They were forced. The Kronos Empire forced them to make a choice even after knowing they were in the wrong. Simon said, "Your Majesty, Your Highness. The Kronos Empire is not making this offer to receive an apology right now. Given Roman Dimitri's ability in the war, it is clear that they intend to eliminate any potential threats against them in advance." They were sure of it. Roman Dimitri was in existence beyond the fence of the kingdom. Cairo, which had always been meek and displayed an attitude befitting a small country, took a different step than before with Roman Dimitri in the front. Other than killing Gustavo, if the testimony from the battlefield reached the Kronos Empire, they would have been wary of the force Roman Dimitri had. He was just in his mid-20s, yet Roman Dimitri was able to kill Gustavo. He didn't just win. It was an overwhelming victory, and no one can really fathom how powerful Roman truly was. An apology was just an excuse in this situation. Daniel Cairo gritted his teeth at the blatant attitude of Kronos. "We are suffering this humiliation because we are a weak nation." His own father, the former king, wanted peace. As he grew up watching that kind of person, Daniel Cairo inherited his father's benevolence, but when he faced the cruel reality, he realized how irresponsible his father was. As the king, he shouldn't have done that. If he faced a brutal situation against a predator like the Kronos Empire, he needed to have a strong national power to survive. The problem was that it was too late. Reality struck, and now the Kronos Empire is forcing them to make an unavoidable choice. Everyone's eyes were focused on Daniel Cairo. In a situation where no one could give any advice except for Simon, Daniel Cairo said with a firm expression, "Roman Dimitri is the hero of Cairo. He did things for Cairo, and that fact is known to all the people in Cairo, including those present here. But what would happen if we abandoned such an existence just so we could live? We might be safe now, but that is all. The Kronos Empire will use this incident as a chance to cut down on our ways to live, and no one else will be willing to sacrifice their life for us. Because when the pillar called Roman Dimitri falls, Cairo is bound to collapse." It was a risky choice. Kronos wasn't the type of nation that said empty words, and they wouldn't let go of their decision to go to war. But in the future, in the new Cairo, there would be no fights within the nation, nor would there be any neglect of talented people dedicated to the nation. Even if the result was their ruin, it was Daniel Cairo's responsibility. At least as the king of the kingdom and as the person who allowed the decision to attack the Kronos Empire, Daniel Cairo didn't avoid the responsibility. "Summon Roman Dimitri right now. I will discuss this matter with him directly." 2 days later, Roman Dimitri arrived at the palace. Daniel Cairo couldn't even greet him properly. That is how things turned out. "What should I do?" He asked him honestly about Kronos' offer. In the situation where his brain couldn't give him the right answer, he needed someone to say something to him. And Roman Dimitri said, "From now on, it is time for a new game. The Kronos Empire is aware of the fact that their proposal is out of touch with common sense. Nevertheless, their reason for forcing such a ridiculous choice is to deal with my existence and set the status of their empire right. If you accept their proposal, the future in which Cairo becomes under the control of the Kronos Empire is unavoidable. I don't know what to do either. However, we can't just ignore the ones with power and move on. Just like what you said, if Kronos wants to set the status of the empire right, they will want us to fulfill one of the options they have given. The first option couldn't be considered, so they were left with the second option, an all-out war with Kronos. Even assuming that Roman Dimitri was the best on the continent, there was no way they could defeat the empire with the power of Cairo alone. Roman Dmitri. From the moment he made the decision to attack first, he already knew the answer. There is a way to avoid war while taking advantage of me. Please send an envoy to the Kronos Empire. I will directly go to the Empire and solve the problem. I cannot allow that. The Kronos Empire wants to punish you now. And if you go there on your own, in the worst case, you could lose your life. Roman's suggestion was too bold. As he said, the problem could be solved, but it was impossible for them to let Roman Dmitri go. It was an irresponsible decision that he didn't want to make. The responsibility for the decision should be shared, but Roman's proposal was no different from making him take full responsibility. It was at that moment that one of the people in the palace who was listening to their conversation stepped forward and said, "Can I say something?" "Yes. Roman Dmitri knows how to solve the problem. And your Majesty considers it a risky choice for Roman Dmitri to visit the Kronos Empire. Wouldn't it be enough for someone else from Cairo to be the envoy to Kronos? If there is such a person who can perfectly implement your plan, I think it will be an optimal agreement." Roman Dmitri intended to execute the plan himself. Just as Daniel Cairo took responsibility for the decision, Roman also had a different opinion. But after confirming the voice of the owner, Roman knew that his words had power, and Daniel Cairo did as well. He nodded his head to show his agreement. "Count Fabius. Does that mean you will go as the envoy to the Kronos Empire?" "You are right. I will represent Cairo and convey our intentions to that heinous Kronos Empire." The raccoon of Cairo, he opened up a new path. Chapter 193. New Map. Part 3. Fabius was like a bat. The kind of life he has lived until now has earned him the nickname the Raccoon of Cairo, and during the clash between Roman Dmitri and Marquis Benedict, he betrayed the nobles. Some people criticized him for it. No matter how much he went after his own gains, seeing him betray the nobles' faction, whom he had been with for a long time, he was more devoted to himself and his own growth. And that wasn't wrong. Fabius wasn't someone you could put your trust in, but that didn't mean his abilities were lacking. So Daniel Cairo thought that maybe Fabius might be the right person. Fabius is one of the best people in Cairo when it comes to his political skills. He knows how to read the trend and make fast and bold choices. Even though he was a key figure in Marquis Benedict's faction, his ability is clear, and his decision to stay by Roman Dimitri's side proves he can be trusted. The problem was that they needed someone who excelled in diplomacy. In order to perfectly carry out Roman Dimitri's plan, it was necessary for that person to have the courage to speak without trembling, even when entering the jaws of a beast. And Fabius met that condition. Aside from simply being capable, Fabius was now looking for a chance to prove his skills. In the new future, this would be the new trend. Count Fabius openly showed his intention to jump on the bandwagon for a bright future. It isn't a bad choice since his intention is clear. If each side achieves the goals they want, then the result is a lot better. Daniel Cairo said. The negotiation with Kronos isn't a matter to be taken lightly. They are similar to magic bombs in a way that we do not know when they will be directed at us, and there is a possibility that they might break the continental law of not touching the envoy. We will reject the options they have given, and you will steer them in our direction. Your life could end the moment you utter a statement of refusal, so will you still take such a risk and leave for Kronos as the envoy? I am ready to give up my life for Cairo. I will do my best to carry out the mission perfectly. He didn't hesitate to answer. And so the final decision fell on Roman Dmitri. Daniel Cairo looked at Roman Dmitri and asked him, I think Count Fabius is the right person for this job. What do you think, Roman Dmitri? The meeting was over. Roman Dmitri, who was given a day to decide, walked with Count Fabius. Tack. And then he stopped walking. In a place far away from people, Roman Dmitri looked at Fabius. Tell me what you want. A count and an heir to a noble family, even though the difference in their status was clear, both Roman Dmitri, who treated him normally, and Count Fabius, who listened to him, accepted the situation naturally. Ever since Count Fabius took the lead in punishing the nobles, regardless of their status, they naturally acted like a lord and a subordinate. The plan was laid out. Count Fabius lowered his head and said, "In the last battle, I had the honor of standing as the vanguard for Roman Dmitri. It may be that I am being greedy, but I don't want our relationship to have an abrupt end. This Fabius wants to live for Roman Dmitri. Please consider my act as an envoy to be an expression of my loyalty to Roman Dmitri." There was a rope in front of his eyes, and Count Fabius grabbed it tightly. Knowing all too well the negative prejudice against him, his loyalty was a little different from other people's. "I will not deny that I am a defector. No matter how much I prove my abilities and pledge allegiance, the basics will not change that. People say a person who has defected once is likely to do so again. I cannot predict the future either. Unlike the rest of Roman Dimitri's followers, I cannot ask you to trust me blindly either, but I will take this chance to show you." He looked at Roman, and with determined eyes, he put strength into his voice. "I don't want to be treated the same way as the people that Mr. Roman Dmitri trusts. However, please use the man named Count Fabius in the future. Anything is fine. I am fine with being used as an envoy this time, and if you order it, I will even hug straws of rice and jump into a pit of fire. I will prove that I am not just a being who follows orders but a useful being who executes them properly. Promise me just one thing in return. Please be my support for wealth and honor, and as long as I get to live by your side, I am ready to do anything." Fabius's proposal was straightforward. Rather than the normal relationship between a lord and a subordinate, he wanted an exchange. If Roman Dmitri remains in power unless he falls down like Marquis Benedict, Fabius said he would be useful to Dmitri until the end. Count Fabius's decision is not accidental. He experienced war with me, and in the process, he learned what kind of person I am. He found out that instead of a one-sided feeling towards me, he wanted a relationship with benefits. It was ideal and fun. On the fierce battlefield, while Roman Dmitri swung his sword at the enemies, Count Fabius looked at Roman alone, how he behaved, what values he had, and what standards his relationships with those who followed him were formed by. There were various characters, and they had different reasons for their allegiance. Chris hoped for power beyond Roman Dmitri, Kevin expressed his blind loyalty to the savior of his life, and Henderson longed for Roman Dmitri, who defeated the Blood Faun. It wasn't just an emotional exchange. Even Vulcan and Pookie, both former mercenaries, were satisfied with the benefits they received from Roman Dmitri, and everyone had their own reasons to follow him. He was sure of it. Roman Dmitri was at the center of everyone. Count Fabius knew right then how important it was to build a relationship with Roman and how to maintain a relationship that benefited him. If Roman Dmitri was similar to Benedict, Fabius would have put on a fake face and cried out his loyalty, but Roman was not Benedict. He honestly emphasized a mutually beneficial relationship. "Tack. Please accept me." He was on his knees. He bowed his head and let go of his pride. The more he looked at him, the more he liked him. The appearance of having a solid foundation to lead someone, this was the answer he had been searching for. Count Fabius. He raised his head. Seeing him look up, Roman Dmitri showed an unwavering gaze. "From now on, you are one of my people, and you will enjoy everything you want." A few days later, after completing all the preparations, Count Fabius joined the delegation and headed for the Kronos Empire. They were running out of time. There was a time limit of 10 days, so it was a bit of a forced march, but the delegation had no choice but to hurry. While moving, a member of the delegation and a noble who followed the king asked, "Count Fabius, how on earth can you survive betraying someone you love? I honestly don't understand. Even if you sometimes fail, you have to succeed dozens of times to be recognized, and Roman Dmitri isn't the type to tolerate failure. Most of all, didn't you survive by moving to another powerful side this time too?" It was an honest question, to which Fabius answered with a smile. "There is something that people misunderstand. There is romance in betrayal." "Romance?" Yes. The so-called renegades tend to stick around without a solid spine and only seek gain. Such beings have no right to swear allegiance. Those in power already have people who have devoted themselves to them, but how can they survive if there are no such people among them? Driving his horse and looking through the plains, he thought of Roman Dmitri. That is why I always give my heart. Despite knowing that a man named Fabius was a traitor, he asked me to prove my worth so he wouldn't abandon me. It is a simple thing. There are people willing to risk their lives. If a person dares to make a decision that even the most loyal people would hesitate to make, but that person has a past of being a traitor, would the part about him being a traitor be the only thing you decide to listen to? For that one reason alone? No, I will probably keep him by my side and use him. That's right. You will use him. That one chance is how a traitor becomes a follower. Actually, their relationship wasn't completely sincere. It was true that he was sincerely carrying out the orders, but that was what the other person wanted. However, Roman was different. For the first time, he didn't put on a mask and speak of loyalty, and Fabius mustered up the courage to speak about a mutually beneficial relationship. I also don't like this life of betrayal. If Marquis Benedict had stayed in power for the rest of his life, I would have stuck with him. The reason I live a life of betrayal is that there has been no one to whom I wanted to give my loyalty to. And Roman Dmitri is someone who is different from the others I had experienced with. It could be a hasty thought, but Count Fabius thought that he might have found someone to serve for the rest of his life. The capital of the empire. They had arrived in Alexander. Count Fabius, who was visiting the empire for the first time, was shocked as he looked at the castle's gate. Is this an empire? There was a huge castle, and the scenery inside was shocking. The magnificent buildings, which couldn't be seen in Cairo, and the strong-looking guards on the other side of the roads gave him goosebumps. He scanned the surroundings with sharp eyes, and this proved just how powerful the empire was. It was so different from Cairo. Daniel Cairo was swayed by the nobles, but Kronos was a nation that respected the emperor like a god. Follow me. They passed through the gate, escorted by a knight. The pattern on his forearm proved that he was a member of the 7th Night Troops, and yet the force this man held was unique. Every time their eyes met, it felt so intense that he gasped for breath. Even if Count Fabius wasn't a great swordsman, he could at least guess whether or not the other person was a strong being. He was sure of it, the Imperial Knights were stronger than Count Nicholas. He couldn't be certain if the existence called Cairo's first sword could rival this man. I have now entered an extraordinary world. His mouth felt dry. He hadn't even met the 12 swords of the continent yet. If he had been tasked to be his guide, then he was surely just a gatekeeper, but that alone completely overwhelmed Count Fabius. And the reason why the envoy of Cairo was now in Kronos popped into his mind. Roman Dmitri took Gustavo's life, the leader of the 10th unit of the Knights of Kronos, but such a result didn't even seem to bother Kronos. He took a step. As he entered the palace, which was the pinnacle of splendor, he passed through endless corridors before stopping in front of a huge door. Your Majesty, the Emperor, the envoy has arrived. The door didn't open right away. It was the Emperor's place. Even though the knight was simply looking at the door as he spoke, he bowed his head to the door and showed respect. Even though Count Fabius was loyal to a different nation, he bowed to the huge door and didn't dare look up until the Emperor's voice could be heard from the other side. It was then. Creak. The door opened. Count Fabius, who finally entered the room, trembled at the presence in front of him. It was the Emperor of the Empire. The sight of him looking down from the highest point made Count Fabius gulp. The moment I slip my words, I will die right here. His instincts warned him. A giant who shouldn't be touched, that was what Count Fabius thought of the Emperor of Kronos, whom he was meeting for the first time. Chapter 194. New Map. Part 4. Is this what it feels like to be suffocated by intimidation? The Emperor of Kronos looked at Count Fabius in silence. He was huge enough to fill the throne and had a cold expression on his face. Even if he cast off the guise of being the Emperor of Kronos, he would still be a 5-star or a swordsman. Although not officially registered in the rankings, the presence that the Emperor had was enough to make the entire palace a mess. Fabius walked slowly. He didn't rush his steps until he reached the Emperor, but he also didn't dare to look up either. The moment the door opened, the scene that came into view was too shocking. The key figures of Kronos were all lined up on both sides of the Emperor, and it showed how huge the mountain that Kronos was if one wanted to climb it. Tack. He stopped walking. He bowed on behalf of the delegation, and then the Emperor asked, "Are you Roman Dmitri?" "No. I am Count Fabius of Kai." Weak. Quack. It happened in an instant. The moment Count Fabius revealed his identity, the Emperor of Kronos distorted his expression, and at the same time, the knight who guided Fabius grabbed him by the neck and made him fall to the ground. He suppressed Fabius's head by force, making it impossible for him to lift his head. And from above, he heard the voice of the Emperor. "My representative made it clear. Negotiations are not possible, and if you do not want an all-out war with Kronos, Roman Dmitri should come and offer up his arm." That. Clench. He couldn't get a word out. The knight was pushing Count Fabius's head with such great force that his words couldn't help but die down. His heart was beating against the ground. He knew that the Emperor of Kronos was a man who loved war, but he didn't think that an envoy would be treated like this. "I understand the meaning of Cairo well. If you want an all-out war, I will show you the will of Kronos by cutting off your arm as the envoy." Thud. His heart fell, and his blood went cold. "If I don't say anything now, Cairo cannot avoid an all-out war. I cannot even beg for anything here. My plan to be in the good graces of Roman Dmitri will be messed up, and his plan will fail. The problem is that if I become too aggressive, the Emperor might make a harsh decision, and our entire nation will be in trouble. I need to convey my words and the intention of Cairo without being too rude but not being too servile either." He shook his head. For a single decision, each word meant a lot. In a situation where his life could be in danger, Count Fabius felt like his senses sharpened. "Your Majesty, the Emperor of Kronos. Cairo does not want an all-out war. Please. Give me a chance to speak. After I convey the will of Cairo, you may take my head and not just my arm." He risked his life. He shook off the hand that was pushing him down and raised his voice. But no answer came back. It felt like an eternity of silence passed where only his heart that was thumping so loud could be heard, and soon the Emperor of Kronos said, "Remember what you just said. If Cairo cannot convince me, you will die on the spot." The knight stepped aside. Fabius got his chance to speak. He got up. With a red face, he caught his breath and looked up at the Emperor of Kronos, his clothes all tangled. He was afraid. His heart raced, but Count Fabius didn't let fear get the best of him. "Our reason for rejecting the offer that the Kronos Empire made is that Marquis Benedict's rebellion didn't have a justification in the first place." Marquis Benedict rebelled because his own safety was in danger, and his involvement with the Kronos Empire was not the right decision to make. "We do not want an all-out war with Kronos, and we have decided that it isn't worth sacrificing the talent of the kingdom for it." Kronos mentioned their justification the other day. Since the empire was drawn in by Cairo's nobles, their attack was justified. First of all, the most important thing was for them to deny that. His words just now were made under the assumption that the Kronos Empire didn't break the continental laws. Cairo asked for the opinion of the international community on this matter. There was a war between the nations for an unjust reason, and it was necessary for us to check if one side had the obligation to be made responsible for it. And the 5 kingdoms, apart from Valhalla, expressed their willingness to agree with Cairo. "Your Majesty, the Emperor of Kronos. There was no reason for another nation to intervene in a war that started with a civil war. However, if you wish for Cairo to make a sacrifice, we have no choice but to be driven into a corner." It was a strange way of talking. By first saying that they had the consent of other kingdoms, it was like saying Cairo was being supported. A few days ago, Roman Dmitry contacted the 5 kingdoms on the continent for the negotiations with the Kronos Empire to go smoothly. The conversation with them wasn't so difficult. The kingdom's alliance in the southern part of Kronos wanted a friendly relationship with Cairo because of their dispute with Kronos. At the same time, the Hector kingdom decided that it was necessary to let go of their past bad relationship and unite their voices this time. It was an incident in which the empire oppressed a kingdom for no reason. The empire is attacking Cairo now, but after that, which kingdom would they go after? That was Roman's plan, to gather the power of the kingdoms. Each kingdom had a struggling military power, but the story would be different if the 6 kingdoms chose to side with each other. And Count Fabius said, Cairo wants peace. If the Kronos Empire wants war, show your will by cutting off my head. However, if you agree with Cairo, I hope this ends well. His speech was over. All their cards were placed on the table, and now it was Kronos' turn to decide. Cairo's intention was too clear. Gambling from the edge of a cliff, if they were pushed, they were saying that all the kingdoms would come together. And there was something else in those words. The reason why the Valhalla Empire wasn't included in the plan was that they were the evil partner of Kronos. They were the 2 high mountains on the same continent. If the name of the Valhalla Empire had been uttered with threatening remarks, the Emperor of Kronos might have made an extreme choice even for the sake of the empire's status. So the Valhalla Empire was excluded. They said Valhalla had nothing to do with this incident, but that didn't mean their existence was completely irrelevant. If a war breaks out between Kronos and the kingdom's alliance, the Kronos Empire will surely win, but what happens after the war is over is the problem. The Kronos Empire, which had exerted a lot of energy to defeat the 6 kingdoms, would have to be very cautious about a war with Valhalla. We didn't mention Valhalla, but they would have no choice but to be wary of them. This is the best option we can choose. It was a kind of intimidation. Touching the pride of the emperor was said to be the best way to compromise. And by attracting other nations, they made it difficult for Kronos to touch them. Roman Dmitry was a great person. Fabius thought that strength could only be found in military power, but the plan that Roman Dmitry thought of was perfect. In the current situation, there was no better plan than this. The Kronos Empire was not ready to conquer the continent yet, and they did not want to hasten it. Gulp. Count Fabius gulped. He trusted Roman Dmitry's plan, but the presence of the Emperor of Kronos made his throat dry. It was then. You seem to have used your head quite a bit. He didn't panic. It wasn't even an angry voice. As if he had expected it, the emperor turned to Count Fabius with an expressionless face. From the start until now, the Emperor of Kronos has not changed his expression much. So even if he was the raccoon of Cairo, he couldn't guess what his real emotions were. In exchange for freeing the captives of Kronos, I will end the problem here. But the treatment of Roman Dmitry is a separate issue. What is that supposed to mean? Roman Dmitry killed my people. Count Fabio, Gustavo, and the Knights of Kronos. They were all devoted to the empire, and as the emperor, I want to be compensated in blood. Every night from now on, my people will visit Roman Dmitry. The crime of killing talented people from the empire, it is up to Roman Dmitry and the Cairo kingdom to handle this issue. The Emperor of Kronos was a scary person. Cairo brought other nations into this issue, yet his desire for the blood of Roman Dmitry didn't stop. Assassination. How can he help him now? No matter how unfair this situation felt, he knew that there was a high chance that the death of Roman Dmitry would end in an assassination. He felt goosebumps rise for a moment. The emperor never wanted an all-out war with Cairo in the first place. It occurred to him that he had set up a plan to restore the status of his empire by driving Cairo into a corner and rescuing his men, along with assassinating Roman Dmitry. Above the sky, his existence was above the heavens. The empire was called an empire for a reason. And from now on, the same things will not work. The emperor said that, and Count Fabius felt lost. A few days later, Fabius returned to Cairo. He went to the king and reported all the things that had happened and bowed to Roman Dmitri. "I apologize. A variable had popped up. The war was avoided." However, as someone who served Roman Dmitri, he couldn't bring himself to talk about the assassination attempts that would happen in the future. His face was red. As a traitor, he showed confidence when he left to prove himself, but in front of the giant, the emperor, Fabius couldn't find an answer. However, "Well done." Roman Dmitri didn't seem interested. He had already accepted the things that Count Fabius couldn't say. The Kronos Empire never gave up on their decision. Their target had been me from the start, and it is very likely that they wouldn't step back without a threat. "You did your best for what I asked for." He had actually expected Kronos' response. Emperor Kronos. As expected, he is a belligerent person. If Roman Dmitri had gone as the envoy, even if he had spoken of assassination, he wouldn't have killed him. It was more of a matter of pride than profit for the emperor. If he had allowed Roman Dmitri to live and killed him outside of the empire, the people would be intimidated by the influence of the empire. So Roman volunteered to go. Knowing that the Kronos Empire was similar to him, he knew that it wasn't dangerous. Even if the worst scenario happened, Roman Dmitri had a way out. "Are you sure you are fine? The Kronos Empire has spoken of assassination, and a swordsman of Valhalla who was once their target died." Count Fabius was concerned. It was to be expected. He trusted Roman Dmitri, but the name Kronos had its own weight. But he didn't know the truth. Roman Dmitri, no, Baek Jung-hyuk, the heavenly demon, what kind of life did he live? Assassinations were a daily occurrence for him. Emperor Kronos' intention to scare him was misguided right from the start. "It doesn't matter. That is my problem now." His blood boiled. Finally, it felt like he was walking on knives after entering this world. Chapter 195. New Map. Part 5. It was a messy time. At the time when the Cairo kingdom was changing rapidly, Count Gregory, who followed the Kronos Empire, was in prison. At first, he kept being stubborn as he was being dragged by the soldiers. He yelled loudly, asking if the Kronos Empire would stay still when they would find out that he was being touched, but the situation was becoming worse as the days progressed. "Is that true?" "Yes. It is a mess outside. It is said that Roman Dmitri led the troops to the Benedict estate and eradicated the rebels. The Kronos Empire joined with the nobles to attack the Western Front, but the nobles fell so quickly that the Kronos Empire couldn't do anything." This. Inside the jail, one of Gregory's men gave him the information. His heart sank with each piece of news. As Marquis Benedict's longtime rival, he knew how well prepared the man was for this kind of situation. In addition, his castle was impregnable. Yet such a fortress was destroyed in just a few days, which meant that his own life was at stake. His last hope was the Kronos Empire. If they could take over the Western Front, there was a chance that they could compromise with the Cairo royal family. But the news just came in. I do not believe it either, but it didn't just end with the Western Front defeating the Kronos Empire. They opened the gates and followed them out, killing Count Fabio, the commander, and Gustavo, the leader of the 10th unit of the Knights of Kronos. What should we do? Roman Dmitri has dealt with all the dangers of the kingdom. At that moment, his head spun. Count Gregory sat down and thought of Roman Dmitri. That monster. He knew that guy was odd. He had such a strong presence that even a small well called Cairo was overflowing. Even when he thought that he overestimated the guy, the truth was that he underestimated him. If the Kronos Empire stepped back, the nobles of the empires and the rebels would not be able to live in this land. And Count Gregory began to get anxious at that point. In a situation where death could fall on him at any time, he couldn't just sit in prison doing nothing. And it was finally the day the prison doors opened. During the time he was summoned by the king, a guard told him, Count Gregory, the Kronos Empire didn't admit their wrongdoings and asked for Roman Dimitri's arm for the crime of killing Count Fabio and Knight Gustavo. At those words, he smiled. There wasn't any mention of him dying. And if Kronos wasn't stepping back, then he might live. Count Gregory was brought before the king. As he knelt on the ground, he looked at Daniel Cairo with a calm face. Count Gregory, you colluded with the Kronos Empire and disturbed the peace of the nation. Do you admit this fact? It was the expected question. The moment he admits it, he will lose the power in his hands, and he might lose his head. But I admit it. He didn't step back. Looking straight into the eyes of the king, he said, "It is an open fact that everyone knows that I follow the Kronos Empire. But is it wrong? Marquis Benedict, who rebelled, had paid for it, but not me. I had nothing to do with it, so why am I being treated like this? So shameless. The fact that you admitted it is a sufficient reason to treat you as a traitor. Your Majesty, you are mistaken. Since Marquis Benedict is from Cairo, it would not be a problem to punish him for treason, but I am someone who has sworn my allegiance to the Kronos Empire. Even if I am a noble in Cairo, I am not in the same position as Marquis Benedict. If you kill me here, will the Kronos Empire stand still? They are hunters. They are even angry that their knight was killed on the battlefield, so how do you think they will respond to my death?" His attitude changed. There was no way he could live silently. If he had the Kronos Empire behind him, he would make use of it. His Majesty, Emperor Kronos, seeks bloody vengeance. If you kill me, you will have to pay a price, so why don't you just send me to the Empire? If you don't want blood on your hands, then get rid of the dangers in Cairo. We can do that for each other. He kept his head up and looked at the king with wide eyes. Even though he was kneeling for his sins, through his eyes, he was showing that he was still higher than Daniel Cairo. The threat worked. At those words, the king's expression crumbled. He isn't completely wrong. Fabius returned, and he learned of the pride that the empire had. Daniel Cairo was worried about Roman, but there was nothing he could do about it. In addition, there was no one else other than the royal knights who could protect the kingdom. The opponent was the Kronos Empire, a horrible monster that was much stronger than Count Nicholas. And so guilt took over him. He was sure that it was the right choice for the kingdom, but he felt it was unfair for Roman to pay the price. From start to finish, Roman did everything for him. If he hadn't defeated the nobles and the Kronos Empire, then Cairo would have been destroyed, but he couldn't just let Roman pay for the price alone. There was no solution. Count Gregory touched the king's soft spot. The empire's faction, he wanted to kill all of them. However, thinking that their anger toward Roman might grow, he didn't want to say anything. He was certainly a king, but he was a weak one. In the situation where he had to make a decision, he felt confused. At that moment, he turned to Roman Dimitri, and their eyes met. It was silent. Roman Dimitri stepped forward and asked, "Can I say something?" "Yes." Emperor Kronos is not the type of person who takes back what he says. If he said he would make me pay with blood, then it means that he would send people to assassinate me. But it has already happened. Aside from the problems you have to deal with from now on, what is there to be afraid of when I was just warned about being killed? Count Fabio and Knight Gustavo, they are people with good names and worth that Count Gregory cannot be compared to. If so, make a decision and lighten the burden on Cairo. Gregory was shocked. And cutting him off before he says anything, Roman Dimitri raises his voice. From the moment the ones committing treason were killed, the peace of Cairo has passed. Your Majesty, your choice paves the path we will move towards. Even if your Majesty's people die because of it, it will be the right decision to make, and no one will resent that choice. There is no war in which no one dies. If you weigh the lives of your people and let go of something important, then the situation becomes irreversible. The leaders present at the Cairo royal palace were at a loss for words. Why? Why was Roman Dimitri so fearless? Even though the Kronos Empire spoke of his assassination so openly, There was no fear in Roman Dimitri's voice. Daniel Cairo gulped. The weak king was always shaken, but he tried to face reality until the end. Cairo owes a great deal of debt to the Dimitri family. Even if this choice makes you the target of assassination, the royal family will not forget Dimitri's devotion. Then he shifted his gaze to Count Gregory. Looking at his puzzled face, he said, Count Gregory, your collusion with the Kronos Empire wasn't enough. You even dared to reveal the facts in front of us, thus tarnishing Cairo's honor. Cairo's chaos has stemmed from neglecting such things. Marquis Benedict, Count Gregory, and Count Denver. From the moment you people only cared about your own interests regardless of the safety of the nation, Cairo fell into absolute chaos. Your Majesty. There is some misunderstanding, shut up. His face was red. Daniel Cairo was no longer a young king. Due to the ongoing fights and after meeting Roman Dimitri, something changed in his heart. He made a decision as king. Daniel Cairo's eyes were cold. Count Gregory, the traitor, will be sentenced to death for endangering the nation. Life was both easy and difficult. Cairo suffered for a long time due to the messy power system, but with Daniel Cairo's decision, things started to change, and two people would climb the guillotine. At the end of Count Gregory and Count Denver, those who followed them didn't dare protest. People flocked to the square in Kairos. But before heading there, Count Denver looked at Roman Dimitri. I was a fool. If I had recognized you as a threat to the empire right from the start, I would have dealt with you before this happened. If it weren't for you, Cairo would have been torn to pieces and walked down to its chaos. Count Gregory was silent. Unlike him, who only looked at the ground in pain, Count Denver hasn't given up yet. Even now, you can swear your allegiance to the empire. Right now, you must be under the illusion of being great, but you are nothing compared to the empire. Knight Gustavo? In Cairo, he is higher than Count Nicholas, but by the standards of the continent, he is just at the 78th. There are so many stronger people in the empire, and you cannot surpass them. Do you think you can handle those monsters? Are you sure you can stop them if they try to kill your family? His voice gained strength. The king had already given the verdict, but he was sure that if Roman changed his mind, he could live. Roman Dimitri. You are not stupid. One choice in life determines everything. If you remain a man of Cairo, all your future choices will turn into hardships. But the empire can put wings on your back. Think wisely. Even if you had crossed the river, which you shouldn't have with Kronos, Valhalla would give you a chance. And if my head is cut off, your chances are over. It was his last chance, but no reply came back. Count Denver gritted his teeth in anger as he said, The day will surely come when you will regret the choice you made today. The Valhalla Empire will make you pay the price for my life. With one choice, you are turning both mountains into your enemies. Clench. He stopped walking. This scene was something Roman was used to. The words spoken by losers were always the same, and when they struggled and failed, a loss of hope could be seen in their eyes. Just like Count Gregory, who had given up on everything. As he looked at Count Denver, who still believed he was right, Roman Dimitri smiled. I hope so. Right, that was it. Those should be the last words a loser should hear, and Count Denver was dragged away with trembling eyes. And then, swish. Clack. He died in front of everyone's eyes.